Hi there, you found this video because you're thinking of doing the Skye Trail, the wonderful, magnificent 90-mile walk which runs between Rubha Hunish in the north to Broadford in the south, along the length of the beautiful Isle of Skye, the island just off the west coast of Scotland. Now when you Google it, the weather looks fantastic, the pictures look magnificent, but it isn't always like that. Stay tuned and I'm going to show you what it's like to walk the Isle of Skye in May 2018 when the weather isn't on your side. The wonderful, the beautiful, the magnificent Isle of Skye. And I record this in October 2018 following the journey that we made in May 2018. Now I'll get stuck into it fairly quickly, but we'll first have a look at the few basics. Of course, I had the Cicerone guide for the Skye Trail and the halves maps, as well as Route Buddy GPS system on the phone, which actually was a real lifesaver. Now, before we get stuck into this, if you wanted to find out more about Skye from our journey, I recorded a three-part series, podcast series. So if you go to theoutdoorstation.co.uk and put Skye into the search box, you'll see a three-part series there. Plus, if you're interested, there's a recent interview with Katie Tunn, an artist who lives on Skye, and she spent 40 days and 40 nights on a nearby island. But that is entirely a different story. So let's get stuck into it. How do you get to Skye? Well, that in itself is a little bit of a challenge. Let's just have a look where it is exactly. Skye, well, first of all, the main place to get to, fly to, drive to, get the train to is, of course, Glasgow. And that can be fairly inexpensive these days. I think it was only about £23 for us to catch the train there, which was good. But Skye itself is all the way up here. And that is a 6-hour bus journey by the only company that does it, which is CityLink. And I think that was around the £45 each way, which was interesting. It's a tiring journey, to say the least. There is a stop-off point for a rest at Fort William and a refreshment break before heading up to the island itself. You cross the bridge and you get to Broadford before the bus terminates at Portree. Now, the reason that we chose to do the route south to north, in fact, let me just show you the map here. The route south to north from Broadford up to Rubha Hunish up in the north was primarily because of time taken to get to the most northerly point. The bus, had we taken it all the way, would have taken us to Portree, the capital, and then with another day just purely for, there's only one or two buses I think that run that would take you up to the most northerly point of the road here, and actually it's probably a good hour or so's walk to Rubha Hunish, as you will see with weather conditions which can be somewhat challenging. But let us come back to the basics of the route first of all. So we got to Broadford, I think it was about 9 o'clock at night, so everything is virtually closed. Thankfully, we had booked into a bed and breakfast. In the process of doing that, we obviously phoned ahead to see if there was somewhere to have something to eat, and I was informed that there was in fact nothing at all. The bus stop where the bus drops you off is right next to a pizza place, and that closes at 9 o'clock, which isn't particularly helpful. But not very far away, in fact on the way back to the B&B where we were staying, there is a supermarket which is, I think, a Tesco's. Let me just check. I'm not too sure actually, it might be a Tesco's or whatever it may be, but there is a supermarket to pick up some sandwiches or whatever else. But that also made Broadford quite a good place to start as well, because in the morning we were able to pop down to the supermarket and top up with the usual important munchies and a couple of pasties and things to keep us going for the first few days. Now, the walk is advised, you're advised when you read the book, it isn't a walk for novices, and there's usually a couple of reasons for that. Then in places it can be pretty hairy, and as you'll see when the weather is against you, which it was for this particular trip, it becomes doubly hairy, which is not very pleasant. However, when you look at the overall route itself, it's like football, it's a game of two halves. Basically, the northernmost half from Rubha Hunish down to Portree is hard going, and that will be explained a bit later on. And really from Portree onwards, it's very pleasant walking, although there are a couple of very hairy places near the infamous Bovey. So let us start with looking at our route for day one, and I'll run some video for you. So as I say, we started from Broadford. Very, very easy walking, lovely day. In fact, the weather was on our side, so it was absolutely perfect. So we walked out of town, up the road and along the old railway line. So as you can imagine, it was fairly easy walking, and you'll see that from the photographs. The most interesting place possibly of the trip is Boreg, or Borareg here, which was one of the clearance villages, and it's the first one you come to, obviously travelling from south to north, but one of the most magnificent places to have a camping spot, I would think, on the last day on the way back. I'm just trying to find a photograph there, so have a look at this one and drop that in. Yeah, here we go. So it's surrounded, it's one of the clearance villages which was cleared back in 1853 by Lord MacDonald, the infamous clearances. And the area is a wealth of buildings, some of which, you know, have still got their lintels in place. So it's very easy to imagine what it must have been like to live there before Lord MacDonald wanted you away so he could put his sheep in the place. So there's a bit of that on the video as well, you get a taster for that, but I think that would make a magnificent last night camping spot if you were doing north to south, and well worth it, and a very easy jaunt then back to the to Broadford the following day. So from continuing with the map, it continues down to Swinish, which is the other clearance village, which actually isn't anywhere near as clear as Boreg. And then we had our first camp spot, is a bit of a panic one. The weather came in really, really bad, and we had to dash into the hills to get a decent flat spot to camp, which you'll see on the video. We were actually aiming for this place just up here, which is at the end of the long road track. You might see it on the video. Let me just see if I can find it on these pictures in the distance. Yeah, here we go. So the green patch in the distance there on the horizon, on the edge of that bay, is a little camping spot, which is fairly flat and comes down to the waterside, and that little white dot you can see was a sole camper van that was there. But that was the spot we were aiming for, and we were about a couple of kilometres short due to the weather, and we were tired as well, so we just called it a day. So let's run the video and you'll see the full experience of what the first day walking south to north on the Isle of Skye, May 2018. And of course, the weather looks magnificent, as it always does on the first day. It looked marvellous. We thought we were in for a treat. But unfortunately, right at the very end, as I say, a heavy storm did come in, and it looks a bit moody there in the video, but I can assure you it was a lot worse. So we were glad to have our F6, our Hex Peak F6, to dive into and protect us from the weather. So that was our first night, and let's just pop back to the map. So that was our first night, and we ended up here, just up the ridge slightly from the path. As you can see, it was a fairly easy walk, nice walking that day, and quite interesting as well. And coming around the cliff face path was not too dangerous, just very pleasant walking. A really, really nice day. So that last day, if you ever do it, will be superb if you're going in the opposite direction. But we're of course going north. Now that was the camping spot there that I was referring to, in the middle of the screen there. And you come off the track, as it were, down the road and turn left and go down to Torrin. Now in Torrin, down here somewhere in the centre by the Cattle Grid Outdoor Centre there's a cafe called the Blue Cafe, and we came past, I don't know, half an hour before their due opening time, and it was horrible. I mean, we were cold, we were wet. All we wanted was a mug of tea and a bit of sympathy, really. And they were working in the cafe, and they were staring straight out the window at us, standing there like drowned rats, and didn't acknowledge us whatsoever. Even they just let us through the door to get out of the weather would have been nice. But that wasn't to be. So as you'll see from the video to follow, what the conditions were like. So we continued. We continued down the road. We understand there's a little beach area here. A few people have camped before. There's no other facilities. There's just an area there that's usable, I suppose. Over the bridge, in fact, we hunkered down out of the weather and the rain underneath the bridge. Initially, I had thought about going up to the loch here in a camping spot there, but when the weather is wild in Scotland, the exposed places aren't necessarily the best places to camp. So we continued along the road to this little car parking area here, and then off this car parking area the track ascends up through a forest, which, as you'll see in the video, was a pretty boggy ascent, to say the least. And then it eventually crosses the top and drops down, and the forestry people had been doing a lot of work down here, and it was an absolute quagmire, knee deep in mud, something we weren't going to be aware of, and as I say, it didn't help very much with the weather conditions. However, if you are more adventurous, you can go straight over, now forgive my pronunciation, but Blabhen, is it? Blabhen? A Munro, straight away there up to 928 metres and drop down the other side, a bit of a shortcut, but we had full packs and we decided that really wasn't for us. So we continued to Kirkebost, or Kirkebost, I suppose. Again, road walking, fairly easy, down to the seafront here. Again, a coastal path, which is very, very easy walking. We got a bit lost. Where are we? We've got a bit lost around here somewhere, where the path seems to go through somebody's garden, but in actual fact it is fairly clear to follow once you find it again. It's not the most, it has to be reminded you, that isn't the most clearest defined path as regards signposting, so it is useful to have a GPS system and your mapping system and keep a good eye on your map in places, and it's always the most simple places that you tend to get slightly misplaced. But we carried on round to Elgol. Now Elgol, down here, down almost right down to the seafront there, has got a little cafe, and they've got facilities there, toilet facilities there, and they were fabulous, really helpful, cheery people. And so we topped up and got warmed up there, along with a handful of other people that were, some of which were going north, some of which were going south. It was an interesting day, but as I say, it was May, so it was slightly early season. But what they did explain in the cafe, which was a bit of a shock, is that last year in 2017, apparently during the summer, the roads were really, really busy, and the BBC put out a note saying it was gridlocked. For whatever reason, CBS News in America picked this up and said that people were being blocked from arriving on Skye, and said it was basically in shutdown. Unfortunately, the knock-on effect to this, so the locals were telling me, is actual fact a lot of the overseas bookings from America had ceased for 2018 because the Americans, from the American news reports, understood that Skye was being shut off and people were being turned back at the bridge, which was a complete pack of lies. So there you go, false news. So let's get back to our walk. So we left Elgol, much refreshed, and this is where it starts to get a little bit hairy. Now, the path is very easy to follow, it's well defined, and in places it is extremely close to the cliff. By extremely close, I mean 4 or 5 meters, and it's quite a drop. And it's also steep hillside as well. Now, the conditions that we walked this in, we had full waterproofs on, and obviously our packs, I think, had waterproofs on as well, cover on the pack, which meant that if we slipped, there was absolutely nothing we could do before we went over the cliff. Now, I'm not exaggerating this, because unfortunately 2 weeks later, that's exactly what happened. Somebody was walking the cliffs in similar conditions with waterproof gear on. They went straight over the edge, and that was it for them. So if you're doing this and it's glorious weather, everything, I'm sure everybody's going to feel very confident. But what I'm saying is, if you're taking this walk in bad weather, sort of weather we did it in, then tread very, very carefully and be very positive with your your progress rather, on the path. Now, we were aiming for the famous Camasunary Bothy, which is up here on the bay. However, once again, we were tired, weather had caught up with us, time had caught up with us. In fact, let's have a look. I think I can do that here at the day 2 on the mapping. And where are we? Let's just bring that up. Okay, that's not going to happen, so I'll come back to that in a second. But I'll run the video and you can see what it was like on day 2 of the Skye walk, and the kind of weather conditions and some of the cliff faces that we were passing by. So that was day 2, and this gives you an idea of the route and the profile of what I was trying to find earlier on. Not particularly high, only 132 metres at the highest point, but as you can see, fairly undulating, that takes you through round to Elgol, and then once you're there, you're at a sort of fairly similar height as you go along. But certainly those cliffs on the day 2, and in actual fact on day 3, were something which were enough to give us a little bit of a scare, and you'll see that on the next video as well. So let's just get back to this. So day 2, and the weather continued like that. In fact, the Cooling Ridge, the infamous Cooling Ridge, I think we only saw it from a distance on day 1, and we never saw it or any of the other magnificent sights in Skye right through to the very end. It took us 6 days, I think it was 6 days to do it. So it wasn't too long, but unfortunately it was in that weather all the way long. Now, if we just go back to the map, we camped here at this spot, and once again the cliff face walk from here to the bothy in places was a little bit scary, but we managed, and as I say, you just take a lot of care. Now, down at the bothy, just from the way the weather comes in to that bay, you'll see the amount of rubbish that is driven up onto the beach. And on a regular weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, I understand that people on Skye do gather, volunteers gather, and they pull a lot of the rubbish off the sea, or off the beach rather, and gather it and take it away, which is a great shame. It is a beautiful spot, and that is looking away from the bothy heading north, and that's looking towards the bothy. In fact, the little white dot you see in that picture there right at the very top is the old bothy. The new bothy is just before it, which was reassuring. So we continued to the bothy, had a nice well, we had a break, got out the weather there, dried off a bit, and then we continued we continued on. Oh my word, you should see, wait till you see this next video. Now, on a lovely day, this would be fantastic walking, and it would take you right through to Sliggerhan, which is where we ended up at the end of the day. There's a campsite at Sliggerhan, and as you can see, it looks fairly easy going. Yes, no problem at all. Bit of water around perhaps. Well, in fact, there was a lot of water around, and we arrived at the hotel soaked to the skin before pitching our tent and then going and having a meal. Now, a little top tip, in fact, when you go to Sliggerhan, the menu in the Walker's Bar and in the hotel side is exactly the same, and the Walker's Bar gets absolutely packed for obvious reasons. But if you go into the hotel side, and they seem quite open to the fact that you might be a little bit damp and dishevelled, they're happy to serve you in there, and you get served a hell of a lot quicker than you do when you're on the Walker side. Okay, so let us now run the video. I don't think there's anything more spectacular to tell you. Fairly easy walking as regards the day. I guess there was nothing there that was really going to show you. Let's have a look. Where are we? Route properties. That's what I'm looking for. There we go. Elevation. There's no shocks there really. It's only 90 meters at the highest point, and that takes you through to the Camasoonery, and then you drop back down to Sliggerhan. So here we go. Let's have some video, and I'll show you day 3. And finally we made it to the Sliggerhan Hotel and campsite, as you see there. And that was actually one of the advantage, as you saw in the video, of wearing approach shoes or trail shoes, is that people that were wearing boots were taking them off and putting them back on, but actually after a while, once the boots fill up with water, they're full of water. There's nothing you can do. So I was quite glad to had approach shoes and just wander through it. And once your feet are wet, that's fine, you get used to it. It's surprising how much heat comes off your feet and you don't actually feel that much discomfort. But as you can see, it was a day of water, walking through water. So we had a pleasant enough evening at the Sliggerhan Hotel. A few drinks and got a nice warm meal into us, so that was fine. It was a wet and windy night, and certainly the forecast was for high gales, and it was going to get worse. Now, around the campsite here in Sliggerhan, as you can see, there are a lot of inlets and river I suppose runoffs, I guess. It was quite boggy in places and quite marshy. And although the weather had been bad, we continued and just waded through it. Although I've heard a lot of people that decide not to cross this river when it's in spate, which I can understand if it's really, really deep. But apart from, it was coming up to over our knees, so it wasn't such a big deal. So we just carried on. But a day's walking really that was very acceptable and easy. Paths well marked. Then you get onto the road down here, and then basically you're following this road track into Portree. Now, the one thing to clarify here, and there's a little bit confusion, let's just see if we can zoom in a bit more. A little bit confusion. When you get to this bridge, just outside of Portree, Portree's just up here, Portree's just there. When you get to this bridge crossing this estuary, there's a picture in the video which you'll see, you'll see that how much the water is being rippled by the wind. There is a suggestion that you might be able to walk down this path, which is close to next to the riverside, and come into Portree that way. I wouldn't advise it. We attempted it and had a look at it, and it was really, really boggy and horrible. So I don't think it's recommended for anybody if they want to have a reasonable arrival. Walking along the road wasn't too bad. Obviously, depending on how busy the road is, it can be busy at times, so you've got to be sensible. But after a kilometre or so, you're onto pavements, and you're into the big city of Portree. Now, we had got to a situation when we were at the Sliggerhan when the weather was forecast to be, I think, 45-mile-an-hour winds, and obviously storms as well, and everything was basically going tits up as regards the weather and our plans. And we had planned to camp at the Portree campsite, which is just here, a kilometre outside of town, as it were, and that was our original aim, to camp there for accommodation. But it didn't quite work out that way. We spoke to the campsite and they said, look, anything over 25-mile-an-hour winds tends to just disappear. It's a very exposed spot. So what do we do? Well, the Sliggerhan Hotel had a room for about £180, which was slightly out of our bed and breakfast budget. And we suddenly found on Facebook a page called Skye Rooms. Let's just get over to it. Skye Rooms. And Skye Rooms is a fantastic facility. People who have got spare rooms, they've got cancellations, or you can go on there and say, look, I'm arriving with, 2 families and a dog, or whatever it may be, I need a house. It can be a little bit more friendly and a little more easy to negotiate and navigate and get some results than a standard booking website. The booking websites are just tortuous, and you go through all the process and you find out they're booked out that particular day. So we went on to Skye Rooms, and I literally skipped down a couple of places and found what became a bed and breakfast that had 1 room, a cancellation, and she became the Angel of Portree for us. Lovely lady. What was the name of the Hamara bed and breakfast? The lady Marion, and she looked after us. And thankfully, her B&B was literally just right by the harbour in town. That was fantastic. And we were able to march into town, go and see her, dump our wet stuff. She had a shed that we could hang all our wet tents and everything that was wet really basically in. And the forecast on the sky was basically 24, 48 hours of this weather. And as you can expect, we weren't anticipating that. So thankfully she had enough space for the period of time. We stayed there for a couple of days and we went down to Portree and ate and shopped as best we could. Something else to be aware of, Portree, it ain't a very big place. And by 9 o'clock everything that was doing food was closed, including the fish and chip shops. In the weather that was there was nowhere to eat fish and chips out of the rain. I think we ended up going to the bus station and sitting in a bus shelter and eating the fish and chips there. It's not a big place, Skye. If you go in peak season, it will be really, really busy. So do book everything and plan ahead. So 24 hours we went in Skye. We decided to continue the following day. Now, this is where we made a big mistake. The route that we decided to take, which would have been from the campsite here, was over the moorland and heading north to the Trotternish Ridge, which looked fantastic on the map. And of course, on the map, when you look at a map, it's always a sunny day, isn't it? So that was our mistake, and well, the video will explain why, but basically it took us something like 5 hours to cross about 4 or 5 kilometers. The going underfoot was horrendous. There were fences to cross. I think we did 4 or 5 barbed wire fences. The underfoot, it was deep heather or bog, and just it made crossing the ground really, really hard work. However, the more popular route, and I can see why now, and why we did this I have no idea looking back on it, the more popular route is to go up the coast, which in actual fact it looks lovely when I look back on the map now. Why did we choose that one? I have no idea. So this is the coastal route. It takes you along a cliff edge path which is fairly easy to navigate, I'm told, fairly undulating, and takes you round to the base of the store, and you would then climb the store and aim to find some camping where you can. Now, once again, this is something to clarify. The Trotternish Ridge is a commitment. It's a long ridge. In fact, let me just zoom out of the map slightly so you can see how far it is. So Portree's down here in the campsite, the bottom of the map there. The store is that one in the middle, and the camp on the ridge campsite is where we ended up camping, and the another spot, there's a potential spot there. Then the Floodygarry Hostel, which is the end of the very, very long day, is up here. So you can see how far that is, and it's not for the faint-hearted. So if you do that ridge and intend to do it in one go, certainly from Portree, you need to crack on. What I would suggest is either camping at the store, below the store, or above, depending on what the weather's like, and then try and do that one, which is still a very long day from there through to Floodygarry. Now, in our case, what happened was we set off along the common over the moorland here. It was tough going, it was slow going. We didn't see the store. We knew where it was, we just didn't see it because of the weather. And we just kept going. And by the time we got to this spot here, the name of which I cannot pronounce properly, Craiglen, something like that, that's where we camped. And actually it was blissful because it was the only flat part of grass area that we could actually pitch on. Unbelievable, I know, but when you look at the amount of land that we were crossing, you would have thought there would be copious amounts of places to camp. Not true. It's very, very stony, very, very boggy, and you know it's notorious. Basically, read the book. It tells you it's notorious. Very, very difficult to find a camping spot. So we were very lucky to get that camping spot that we did, and very grateful to get out the rain and the weather. We did meet a couple of young French or Belgian people, I think, that were heading the opposite direction, that were heading into the weather, and they were ill prepared. They were Sunday walkers or day walkers as it were, but they didn't really have heavy duty weather protection, and we were quite worried about them because once you're on the ridge, you're on the ridge. There's no getting down. The only place you can get down is the store or down to the roadside before it heads down to Floodygarry. it's a commitment, as I say, and that's why a lot of people say this is a walk of two halves, and this is the tough half. Right, so let us run the video from Sliggerhun to Portree, and then we'll pick up again for a couple of minutes before we do the Portree onwards. And there you have the quaint village of Portree. Not an awful lot to keep you occupied for 24 hours there, so bear that in mind when you decide to visit. But a charming place nonetheless, very helpful and very friendly people as well. So let's get on to that second video, which is basically, as I say, takes us from Portree, from the campsite where we walked from Portree, and we headed up across the common, over the top by the store, and you'll see what the weather conditions were like. I think there's a video, lovely picture of Rose and I hitting the store peak, as it were, but you can't see anything else. And navigating, actually, let me just touch on that. Navigating in these weather conditions up on the ridge, you would think, is fairly straightforward. After all, it's a cliff path, so keep the cliff on the right hand side and everything else on the left hand side and you should be safe. Not so. It's quite undulating, and there's a lot of inlets that can be misleading, and it was only sometimes when we turned and followed what we thought was the path and we felt the weather change where it was on our face, from one side to our face or to the other side, we realised we were heading in the wrong direction. Easily done in those conditions, your head's down. And there's also a picture of us in the body bag as well. We took a body bag with us, which is a useful item for, particularly for these sort of conditions, to get you out of the weather and just to get some rest from the continual battering. It is the wind that causes the problem rather than the rain, and the combination can be pretty brutal. And we had a rest and a bite to eat before we carried on, and just confirmed all the time. We were confirming every 5-10 minutes on the GPS exactly where we were. It was that sort of tough going. So let's have a look at the video out of Portree. Here we go. And there we were, thankfully resting at the end of the day up on the ridge. As I say, I mean, some of the video there, it looked glorious, didn't it? It looked fantastic. The sun came out, there were just pockets of sunshine between clouds. All of a sudden, wow, we had a view. And then the next minute, it had gone, disappeared entirely, which was just frustrating, because every time we thought, right, okay, that's there's the store, it's got to be this way, it suddenly went, and such is the weather on Skye. But you saw there in some of the video that what it was like underfoot. It's really shaly, lots of stone. It's just not, you know, great camping spot. But anyway, we found a little spot just here, which was a huge bonus, and we had what actually turned out to be a fairly pleasant night. The last few rays from the sunshine in the evening allowed us to have a bit of a view, and then in the morning it was all gone again. However, it was a day to get to Floodygarry this time, so we continued along the ridge, as I say, once again, one or two places, losing our direction. Met a couple of folk along around here somewhere, by this other camping spot, who'd come up for the night, and they were going to do the ridge but decided to head back, so we walked back with them and continued down to the roadside here. And you can see where all the tourists in the video that you're about to see. You'll see all the tourist cars are parked, and people were gleefully walking along this track here to these various pinnacles that you can see along here on a good day. But unfortunately, on that particular day, you couldn't see anything. So there's a lot of wet and damp people walking along this path here, and we were just plodding on as always. But we made it down to the roadside at Floodygarry, down here, and it was just a short walk along the Floodygarry roadside down to the hostel. Now there's mixed reports about the guys in the hostel, some saying they're, I don't know, not very friendly or a bit political or something. We found them absolutely fantastic. They were heavenly, they really were. We arrived early than they would normally take people, but we just said, just dump our stuff there, go and make yourself a cup of tea. And it was a nice hostel, and in the end we had a room, and we shared it with the people we bumped into on the actual ridge itself. So it worked out really, really well. And we went to the Floodygarry Hotel, which is next door, and if you've got fairly deep pockets, that would be a very comfortable place to spend an evening, but I do mean very deep pockets. So let's just run this little bit of video and get to the Floodygarry Hotel.
Thank you.
And doesn't it look marvellous? Beautiful sunny day. That's what Skye's like every single day. As if. So you have experienced sort of pretty mixed weather. You can see what we went through. So all I would say is if you're going to Skye, plan for the worst, hope for the best. Okay, let's have a look at the last day. Now, the Floody Gary hostel was very welcoming. It's a bit boggy coming out of here, but basically, as you'll see, it was a pretty blustery day, which got worse weather-wise as the day went on. The wind, that is, not so much the rain. Fairly easy walking, very interesting, very pleasant. A couple of spots which are a bit close to the edge of the cliff there, but nothing too unpleasant. And you find your way through this little village of Balmaqueen onto the open moorland again before crossing over to the final path to Rubha Hunish. Now, one thing I've got to make clear here. We made a huge mistake. A huge mistake. We're talking almost biblical mistake on this particular section. Now, if you're walking north to south, you won't have this problem, because as you leave the body at Rubha Hunish, you naturally walk with the fence on your left hand side before the cliff face. However, if you're walking south to north, the path that this on the track here, where it just turns left there by the cliff edge, takes you on the outside of the fence. So this is a fence line here, this dark line that runs zigzagged along the pink line there. That is a fence line, and so we made the mistake of crossing over the gate and walking with the fence on our left and the cliff face on our right. After all, we're outdoor people, we respect the land, didn't want to walk on somebody's farmland, so we walked with the fence on one side and the cliff on the other. However, the weather got really, really bad. Once again, the winds were just really, really strong. So much so that the fence that you'll see, that we were holding on with both hands onto this fence not to get blown over the cliff edge. What happened was the path got narrower and narrower and narrower. And unfortunately, I didn't get a picture of the one place where there was no path, just fence hanging over infinity, which obviously is not the easiest thing to cross. Just before that, thankfully, we met a couple of, I think it was 4 Dutch people actually, who were doing the route north to south, and they were on the other side of the fence and they helped us across the fence. The reason the fence was difficult, it wasn't quite a deer fence, but it was pretty high, so it wasn't your normal waist height fence, and consequently we struggled to get ourselves across that and onto safe ground, but we were very glad we did. So if you're travelling north to south, you'll be safe. If you're travelling south to north, make sure you don't cross that fence but stay on the inside of it. So let's just go back to the map. And so this is the tricky point here where it dog legs left, and once we had passed round this, I think you'll see a picture of this little inlet here, and we made it round to the bothy, the lookout at Rubha Hunish there, which has got a magnificent view. But once again, the wind was so high that when we got in there and out of the weather, we were extremely grateful, obviously, to rest there. But when we came out, I didn't manage to capture it, but Rose almost got blown over the cliff edge. There was so much noise with the wind, I didn't even see it happen, and she shot right across the ground. You'll see her, she's standing by the bothy at the end. She literally just stood up again and crawled back to the bothy. But it's a wonderful spot, fantastic views. We romantically had great ideas of camping down on the foreshore down here, which on a good day would be magnificent. Lots of whale watching, lots of seal watching from that sort of area. But the weather, as you'll see, the weather wasn't on our side. So we decided to just have a break there, have something to eat, and then head back to the road and try and pick the bus up. We knew there was a bus. There's only one bus in the morning and one bus in the afternoon. So we knew there was a bus that would take us back to Portree. And once again, we contacted our angel of Portree, Marion at Hamara Bed and Breakfast, and she managed to put us up for the night. She was an absolute angel. She had a space, which was really, really good and grateful. And that was the end of our Skye Trail. The path from the bothy to the roadside takes you a lot longer than you anticipate it might do. but we've managed to pick the bus up. I think it was down on this bend down here. The sort of place it tends to stop is by this hotel, which is no longer a hotel. And there's nothing else to do apart from sit on the roadside and wait for the bus to arrive. So that's pretty well our trip to the Isle of Skye, 6 days long. Interesting weather made it a challenge, and then Rose returned back home to the Midlands, and the following day I started the 200-mile TGO challenge, walking from west to east coast of Scotland, and had absolutely magnificent weather the whole way. That's just the way it goes. Anyway, here's our last day. Stronger and stronger.
I thought it would be a nice coastal village walk.
Yeah. And that's it. That is our Skye Trail. I hope you've enjoyed that. If you want more information, of course, do check out the website where there is a 3-part podcast series on that, but there's also best part of 500 podcasts relating to anything to do with self-powered travel. So do check that out. That's theoutdoorstation.co.uk and have a look at the podcasts and many of the videos we've got there. I hope you enjoyed that. Stay tuned. Do link to us, subscribe to the RSS feed, join our Instagram, etc., etc. And hopefully we will be along shortly with the next video, which will be the 200-mile TGO challenge from 2018. Until then, thanks for watching and bye for now.